Stories, Philippines, podcast.
Before we begin the story, let me quickly remind you that if you have a story that chills you to the bone and you believe needs to be shared, we are listening. Send your chilling accounts of the paranormal, folklore, or dark history to our email, storiesphpodcast@gmail.com. Your story could be the subject of a future episode. The bell tolls, not with the sonorous call of worship, but with a deep, shuddering vibration, a sound that promises despair. Have you ever felt the weight of a sin you didn't commit? A spiritual debt passed down like a grim inheritance? What happens when the most sacred promises of faith, the very rituals meant to save a soul, become the tools of its damnation? When the waters of baptism meant to wash away original sin become a terrible, suffocating brew that breeds a monster? I am Paul, and you're listening to Stories Philippines podcast. The air in the old stone church of St. James the Greater in Pasig was thick, not just with the humid heat of the Philippines, but with the heavy sweet scent of melting wax and ancient dust. It was the 1980s, a time when the fervent Catholic faith was the bedrock of every community, yet a whisper of something much older and darker still curled in the shadows of the confessional. The Philippines, a nation forged in the crucible of Spanish colonialism, saw its indigenous spiritual world clash violently with the imported dogma of the Roman Catholic Church. For over 3 centuries, the faith was imposed, yet the anitos, the spirits of the ancestors and nature, never truly left. They merely retreated, waiting. What resulted was a potent, often contradictory, blend of devotion and dread. A person might devoutly attend Mass on Sunday and still offer a sacrifice to the Spirit living in the old baleti tree on Monday. The sacrament of baptism is the gate to the Christian life. It is the spiritual cleansing that removes the stain of original sin, initiating a soul into the grace of the Church. Without it, the soul is, according to traditional Catholic theology, eternally barred from the beatific vision of heaven. A soul caught in this limbo, this state of unredemption, becomes spiritually unmoored. This concept has global parallels. The fear of the undead child, the creature of spiritual limbo, is not unique to the archipelago. In England, there are legends of the banshee-like spirits wailing for unbaptized infants. Slavic folklore speaks of the Navi, the spectral children who died before baptism. But in the Philippines, this spiritual terror takes a specific monstrous form, the tiyanak. Tiyanak is not just a ghost, it is a demon baby. The folklore states it is the spirit of an infant who died before receiving baptism, or in darker versions, a fetus that was aborted. Lacking the grace of the church, the spirit is taken by dark forces and twisted into a predator. It assumes the guise of a beautiful, helpless baby, crying piteously in the jungle or on a quiet path. A kind soul, hearing the cries, picks it up to soothe it, and that's when the horror begins. The baby suddenly transforms. Its face contorts into a hideous mask, its eyes glow like embers, and its nails elongate into sharp talons. It laughs, a maniacal grating cackle, before it attacks, sucking the lifeblood or consuming the flesh of its victim. It is the embodiment of the sacred promise failing, a symbol of the church's grace denied. The story unfolds in a small provincial town outside of San Pablo City, Laguna. This region, known for its 7 volcanic lakes, is lush, yet its beauty is shadowed by an intense, almost claustrophobic spiritual fervor. The locals are deeply religious, yet their faith is often intertwined with an abiding dread of the unseen. Our central figure is Celso Rafael Diaz, a man in his late 20s, a deeply devout Catholic who worked as a lay minister for his local parish. Celso was a man of quiet, earnest faith, the type who took his spiritual obligations with profound seriousness. He and his wife, Lourdes Clarita Ramos, a gentle and reserved woman, had been married for 6 years. They desperately wanted a child, but Lourdes had suffered 3 miscarriages. Each loss was a spiritual blow, a sign, some whispered, of a curse. Their quiet life was ripped apart on a rainy evening in the early 1990s. Celso was walking home from an emergency call to administer the anointing of the sick to a dying parishioner. The path was muddy, winding through a cluster of mango and coconut trees. A place the locals warned was thin with spirits. He heard it. A faint, heart-wrenching sound. A baby's cry. If this story is sparking something in you, a connection to the darkness that lurks beneath the surface of faith, then consider supporting our work. You can find show notes and all the ways to support the Stories Philippines podcast right in the description of this episode. Your support helps us continue to delve into these shadows. The sound was insistent, vulnerable. Says a man whose life was dedicated to service and grace couldn't ignore it. He followed the sound, his lantern casting weak, flickering light on the dense foliage. He found a small bundle wrapped in a soiled blanket, tucked beneath the roots of an old mangrove. Inside was a baby. It looked newborn, tiny, with an almost unnaturally perfect face. It was crying, its little fists clenched, tears streaking its flushed cheeks. "Oh my God," Celso whispered, an involuntary prayer, a plea to his God. He looked around. No mother, no house, just the deepening shadows and the drumming rain. A terrible, immediate conviction seized him. This was a foundling, abandoned. His Christian duty was clear. He gently scooped up the bundle. The baby immediately stopped crying and stared up at him with enormous black eyes. The look was disconcerting, too knowing for an infant, but Celso dismissed it as the anxiety of the moment. He rushed home. Lourdes was horrified, yet her maternal instinct took over. They immediately began caring for the infant. They named him Elias. For weeks, Elias was an angel, quiet, rarely fussing, sleeping through the night, but the silence began to feel oppressive. The baby never truly cried again, and he never smiled. His large, dark eyes seemed to follow Celso and Lourdes everywhere, a silent, unnerving scrutiny. Celso began to obsess over the baby's spiritual status. He was unbaptized, an incomplete soul. He needed the sacrament, the blessing that would bring him into the fold of the church. Celso, driven by a fear that Elias might die without God's grace, secretly planned the baptism for the next Sunday. On the night before the planned ceremony, the atmosphere in the small house changed. A coldness settled, unnatural and bone-deep, even for the tropics. Lourdes woke Celso with a desperate shake. "Celso, the baby, he's gone!" The crib was empty. A faint, sickeningly sweet metallic smell hung in the air. Terror, cold and sharp, pierced Celso's heart. He was a man of faith, a spiritual caretaker. He had failed. He heard the sound then, a wet smacking noise coming from the small dining area. He crept toward it, a heavy wooden crucifix clutched in his hand. Elias was there, but he was no longer a baby. He was crouched over the body of the family's little terrier, its throat torn open. The baby's skin was pale and waxy, his small teeth had elongated into sharp points, and his eyes glowed with a feral red light. And the sound that emanated from him was not a cry, but a high-pitched, mocking cackle. The tiyanakos revealed, "This is the core of the sacred betrayal." Celso had brought the darkness into his own home. Believing he was fulfilling his sacred duty, the very object of his Christian charity had become the agent of his terror. Celso reacted with instinct, the reflex of a lifetime of faith. He raised the crucifix. The tiyanak screamed, a sound that pierced the eardrums and burrowed into the soul, and recoiled, hissing. The object of grace repelled the creature of unredemption. But the tiyanak did not flee. It lunged, its small hands grabbing Celso's wrist, the sharp nails biting deep. "You failed," a voice, ancient and echoing, seemed to whisper directly into Celso's mind. "You offered the water, but the darkness was already here. You took the lost, and now the lost will take you." The creature wasn't just physical, it was a spiritual weapon, preying on Celso's deepest fear, the failure of his faith. The Tiyanak did not seek to simply kill, it sought to damn. We've heard some truly incredible and terrifying accounts from our listeners. If you want to dive deeper into the darkness we explore and get behind-the-scenes insights, access all of our exclusive bonus content and episodes over on our Patreon. Your support there helps us keep the lights on and the shadows away. The phenomenon of the Tiyanak and its international cousins like the Chupacabra or the incubus/succubus phenomena has been a focus of modern paranormal investigation. Teams that have researched similar claims in the Philippines often find themselves caught in a confusing nexus of activity. The classic signs of demonic infestation are often reported: sudden drops in temperature, poltergeist activity centered around children, and crucially, a profound sense of spiritual oppression and guilt felt by the victims. In the case of the Tiyanak, investigators speculate a potential psychological component. The creature's appearance often coincides with intense grief over the loss of a child or an immense guilt over an act like an abortion or the rejection of a sacred duty. The subconscious mind, deeply influenced by a culture of religious fear, could manifest a hallucination that perfectly matches the local spiritual monster. The Tiyanak becomes the externalized projection of unaddressed grief and spiritual anxiety. From a purely psychological standpoint, Seo's experience could be viewed as a stress-induced psychosis or an acute dissociative episode. The repeated trauma of his wife's miscarriages, his intense religious guilt over failing to baptize the foundling immediately, and the cultural fear of the Tiyanak all converged. His mind created an external monster to manage an internal, unbearable conflict. Sleep paralysis is another common explanation. The terror of a demon or spectral figure sitting on one's chest, common in many cultures, can easily be interpreted through a local lens. The baby sitting on the chest, small yet suffocatingly heavy, is a textbook manifestation of this frightening but explainable neurological event. However, these explanations struggle to account for the shared experience. Lourdes, witnessing the event, collapsed in spiritual shock, confirming the baby's transformation. A small scratch, impossibly deep, appeared on Celso's wrist. The dog's body was a chilling, indisputable fact. The church itself has a complex view of these matters. Exorcists and theologians who deal with spiritual warfare in the Philippines often speak of a spiritual loophole. A soul that does not receive the sacrament of baptism is not inherently evil, but it is considered to be without the special protection of divine grace. This absence of grace is not a vacuum, it's an invitation. Indigenous folk spirits or even high-ranking demons are believed to exploit this vulnerability. They take the unbaptized soul and use it as a vessel or a lure. The soul is not the demon is simply hijacking a vessel outside the church's protection. So, the Tiyanak's laughter is not just maniacal, it is blasphemous. It is the sound of hell mocking the promises of heaven. It is a terrifying message. The one thing you rely on for salvation, the ritual of the church, is not always enough to protect you. Human error, neglect, or even an act of mercy can be twisted into a fatal flaw. Celso, his vision momentarily cleared by the raw terror, did the only thing he could. He knew he was fighting not flesh and blood, but a spiritual entity that wore the mask of a betrayed infant. He didn't try to fight the creature. He reached for the wooden container that held the holy water from the nearby parish church. With a shaking hand, he splashed the water onto the small, convulsing figure. The effect was immediate and horrifying. The Tiyanak didn't just burn, it seemed to unravel. The perfect baby form began to melt, sloughing off the body to reveal something dark, desiccated, and indescribable beneath. The creature let out a final, impossibly loud scream that sounded like 1,000 heartbroken infants wailing at once. Then, silence. In the dining room, all that remained was the dead dog, the spilt holy water, and a small, scorched patch of blanket. No baby, no body. Celso and Lourdes never spoke of the creature again, not in detail. They only ever referred to it as the mistake. Celso resigned from his lay ministry. He could no longer preach salvation when he felt so keenly the sting of damnation. His faith was not destroyed, it was tempered into a fearful, cautious sting. The trust in ritual was replaced by a deep-seated dread of its potential failure. We are always seeking to expand our circle of listeners who share our fascination with the darkest corners of human experience and folklore. Follow the Stories Philippines podcast on all our social media platforms for daily folklore facts, historical tidbits, and more behind-the-scenes content. The Tiyanak is more than a monster. It is a mirror. It forces us to confront the boundaries of our faith. It asks a terrible, profound question. If salvation is conditional on a ritual, what happens to the innocent soul that is denied that right through no fault of its own? Does grace require an invitation? Or is it a pervasive, unconditional force? In the Philippines, the fear of the Tiyanak remains, a testament to the fact that for centuries, the profound spiritual anxieties of the indigenous past and the strict dogma of the imported religion have never quite reconciled. We live in the tension between the sacred and the savage. We clutch our rosaries, but we still fear the shadows of the unbaptized soul. What price are we truly paying for our faith? Is the grace of the church a shield or simply another weapon that can be turned against us when we falter? Thank you for listening to Stories Philippines podcast. If you enjoyed this journey into the terrifying intersections of faith and fear, please like, subscribe, follow, and share this podcast with others who dare to look into the darkness. Remember, you can support the podcast financially in ways you can find in the show notes. Join us next time as we explore another tale from the shadows of the archipelago.